Welcome to the Compact Mysteries podcast from compactmysteries.com, the show where we try to unravel a different bite-sized mystery each week, from baffling disappearances and strange objects to unexplained events and mysterious places. This is episode 65, The Disappearance of the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant enters history not as a legend, but as a matter-of-fact physical object. According to the Hebrew Bible, the Ark was commissioned by God himself during the Israelites' exodus from Egypt, sometime in the late 13th century BCE. Its purpose was clear and uncompromising. This was not a symbol. It was a physical object designed to house the covenant between God and Israel. The book of Exodus describes the Ark in almost obsessive detail. It was to be made from acacia wood, a durable timber native to the region, measuring roughly 131 centimeters long, 79 centimeters wide, and 79 centimeters high. The chest was overlaid with pure gold, inside and out, and crowned with a solid gold lid, known as the mercy seat. From this lid rose two cherubim, their wings outstretched and facing one another, forming a throne-like space where God's presence was said to manifest. Inside the Ark were placed the most sacred objects of Israelite tradition. Chief among them were the stone tablets bearing the Ten Commandments, traditionally associated with Moses. Later texts suggest it may also have contained Aaron's staff and a jar of manna, physical reminders of divine authority, priesthood, and sustenance. Together, these items transformed the Ark into a portable focal point of divine power. The Ark was never meant to be touched directly. Rings were fixed to its sides and poles were threaded through them, so it could be carried without human hands making contact. Even this precaution was not foolproof. Biblical accounts warn repeatedly that improper handling could be fatal, reinforcing the idea that the Ark was not merely holy, but dangerous. During the Israelites' wanderings, the Ark travelled with them, positioned at the heart of the camp and carried into battle. It was credited with miraculous powers, from parting the waters of the Jordan River to toppling the walls of Jericho. These stories cemented its reputation as both a weapon and a witness, enforcing divine will rather than human strategy. From the very beginning, then, the Ark was more than an artifact. It was a physical embodiment of authority, law, and presence. That makes its later disappearance all the more unsettling. When something so clearly defined, so carefully described, and so central to a people's identity vanishes, the absence carries as much weight as the object ever did. For centuries, the Ark of the Covenant was not hidden, lost, or mysterious. It occupied the very center of Israelite religious life. After the Israelites settled in Canaan, the Ark was housed at various sacred sites before finally being installed in the first temple in Jerusalem, traditionally attributed to the reign of King Solomon in the 10th century BCE. There, it rested in the Holy of Holies, a sealed inner chamber entered only once a year by the high priest on Yom Kippur. Within the temple, the Ark's role shifted subtly but significantly. It was no longer a travelling object carried into battle or across the wilderness. Instead, it became fixed, symbolic, and deeply institutionalized. Its presence legitimized the temple itself, anchoring political authority, religious law, and divine favor in one physical location. As long as the Ark remained, the covenant endured. Then, quietly, it begins to slip from the record. Later, biblical books describing the reigns of Judah's kings mention temple rituals, reforms, and even the removal of pagan idols, but the Ark itself fades into silence. By the time of King Josiah's religious reforms in the late 7th century BCE, a cryptic reference suggests the Ark may already have been removed from public ritual. Whether this was for protection, reverence, or secrecy is unclear. What is clear is that it was no longer central to daily worship. The decisive moment came in 587 BCE, when Babylonian forces under Nebuchadnezzar II captured Jerusalem and destroyed the first temple. The biblical account in Kings and Chronicles lists sacred objects looted and destroyed, yet the Ark is conspicuously absent from the inventory. This omission has fueled centuries of debate. Was it taken and melted down? Hidden before the siege, or removed long before the Babylonians arrived? What makes the disappearance so striking is its abruptness. Objects of far lesser importance are carefully catalogued, but the most sacred item of all simply vanishes from the narrative. When the second temple was later built after the Babylonian exile, the Holy of Holies stood empty. No ark replaced it. Ritual continued, but something fundamental was missing. From this point onward, the ark shifts from historical object to unresolved question. It leaves behind no confirmed trail, only silence, speculation, and the unsettling sense that something central to the story of ancient Israel was deliberately removed, rather than accidentally lost. When historians talk about the disappearance of the Ark of the Covenant, they are really talking about the moment when reliable references stop. The problem is not that the Ark was dramatically stolen or destroyed in full view. It is that it fades out quietly, leaving scholars to argue over its final confirmed appearances. The Ark is last clearly mentioned during the period of the First Temple in Jerusalem. Earlier biblical texts describe it as resting in the Holy of Holies, unseen by all except the high priest on the most sacred day of the year. After that, references become indirect, ambiguous, or symbolic. This absence is especially striking, given how carefully other temple objects are documented. One of the final possible references appears during the reign of King Josiah in the late 7th century BCE. In the Book of Chronicles, priests are instructed to return the ark to the temple after a period in which it may have been removed. Some scholars interpret this as evidence that the ark was still physically present, though no details are given about where it had been kept or why it was moved. Others argue the passage reflects ritual memory rather than reality, a theological attempt to reaffirm continuity during reform. By the time Babylonian forces approached Jerusalem in the early 6th century BCE, the ark was already absent from detailed descriptions. When the Babylonians finally captured the city in 587 BCE and destroyed the First Temple, the lists of plundered treasures are thorough. Gold vessels, furnishings, and sacred implements are all named. The ark is not. Its absence from these lists is one of the strongest pieces of circumstantial evidence that it was no longer in the temple at the time of the destruction. Later Jewish texts seem to acknowledge this absence. The prophet Jeremiah speaks of a future where the ark will no longer be remembered or missed, suggesting it was already gone in his lifetime. Crucially, this is not framed as a tragedy, but as a shift in religious focus away from objects and toward the covenant itself. Taken together, these references suggest the ark did not vanish in a single dramatic moment. Instead, it appears to have been removed deliberately, possibly decades before Jerusalem fell. Whether it was hidden, relocated, or ritually retired remains unknown. What can be said with confidence is that by the time history becomes clear again, the ark had already passed beyond reach, leaving behind only echoes and unanswered questions. Once the Ark of the Covenant disappears from the historical record, three broad explanations emerge, each rooted in a different way of understanding sacred objects. Was the Ark destroyed by human hands, hidden deliberately by its guardians, or removed by divine will? The fact that none of these possibilities can be ruled out is what keeps the mystery alive. The most straightforward explanation is destruction. Jerusalem was brutally sacked by Babylonian forces in 587 BCE, and the First Temple was razed. Many sacred objects were stripped of their gold and either repurposed or melted down. If the Ark were still present, it could have met the same fate. Yet this explanation has a glaring weakness. The Ark was not merely gilded wood. It was the physical symbol of the covenant itself. Its destruction would have represented a theological catastrophe, and yet no biblical text records such an event. The silence feels deliberate. That leads to the second possibility: secrecy. Several later Jewish traditions suggest the Ark was hidden to protect it from desecration. One enduring tradition claims the prophet Jeremiah concealed the Ark in a cave on Mount Nebo before the Babylonian invasion. Another proposes it was hidden beneath the Temple Mount itself, sealed within underground chambers explicitly designed for this purpose. These stories share a common assumption that human custodians acted to remove the Ark from history rather than allow it to be captured. There is also a more radical interpretation rooted in theology rather than logistics. Some biblical texts imply that the Ark's physical presence was no longer necessary. In this view, the covenant had shifted from an object to an idea. The prophet Jeremiah speaks of a future where the ark will no longer be remembered or recreated, suggesting its disappearance was not a failure but a transformation. From this perspective, the ark did not need to be destroyed or hidden. Its role was complete. A further complication is the ark's perceived danger. Biblical narratives repeatedly warn that improper handling brings death. If later religious leaders believed the ark was too powerful, too volatile, or too easily misunderstood, removing it permanently may have been seen as an act of preservation rather than loss. Each explanation reflects a different anxiety. Destruction implies vulnerability, secrecy implies fear, divine removal implies evolution. None can be proven, and that uncertainty is precisely the point. The ark vanishes not with a single explanation, but with a choice of meanings, each revealing as much about the people who tell the story as about the object itself. Once the Ark of the Covenant disappears from the biblical record, the story fragments into a web of traditions, legends, and theories that stretch far beyond Jerusalem. Among them, one location dominates the conversation more than any other: Ethiopia. According to Ethiopian tradition, the Ark was brought to the ancient city of Aksum by Menelik I, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This account, recorded in the medieval text Kebra Nagast, claims the Ark has been safeguarded ever since within the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. There it is said to be protected by a single guardian monk, sworn to lifelong secrecy and forbidden from leaving the grounds. No one else may see the Ark. No photographs are allowed. No inspections are permitted. Believers argue that this secrecy is precisely what preserves its sanctity. Skeptics point out that it also prevents verification. Beyond Ethiopia, other theories take a more archaeological turn. One long-standing belief suggests the Ark lies hidden beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, sealed away in subterranean chambers constructed before the Babylonian invasion. This idea gained traction in the 20th century as underground tunnels and ancient passageways were documented beneath the site. However, political and religious sensitivities have made any direct exploration impossible, leaving the theory permanently suspended between plausibility and speculation. Some traditions place the Ark further afield. Legends in southern Africa describe a sacred object carried by the Lemba people, whose rituals and ancestry show striking parallels with ancient Jewish practices. Others argue the Ark was taken to Egypt, concealed among Jewish communities that fled south before the fall of Jerusalem. Each theory draws selectively on fragments of history, oral tradition, and coincidence. What all these accounts share is a refusal to accept that the Ark was simply destroyed. The object's symbolic weight makes disappearance feel unsatisfying. It must be somewhere, guarded, waiting, misunderstood but intact. Yet historians remain cautious. None of these theories can be confirmed without physical evidence, and none fully align with the archaeological record. Still, the endurance of these stories tells its own tale. The Ark's power lies not only in what it was, but in what people need it to be. A relic of divine authority does not fade quietly. It relocates, reappears, and reinvents itself, wherever belief is strongest. Whether the Ark of the Covenant survives in a guarded chamber, lies hidden beneath layers of stone, or was lost centuries ago, its absence has proved as influential as its presence ever was. The Ark matters not because it can be located on a map, but because of what it represented, and still represents to those who tell its story. At its core, the Ark was never just a container for sacred objects. It was a physical expression of authority, law, and divine proximity. In a world where gods were often distant or abstract, the Ark was tangible. It moved with the people, stood at the center of worship, and made belief visible. Losing it forced a fundamental shift. Faith could no longer depend on an object that could be touched, guarded, or hidden. It had to become internalized. That shift reshaped Judaism in lasting ways. After the destruction of the First Temple, religious life adapted. Prayer, law, and study replaced sacrifice and sacred space. The covenant endured without the Ark, arguably becoming stronger precisely because it no longer relied on a physical focal point. In this sense, the disappearance was not a failure, but a transformation. The Ark also endures as a cultural symbol. it has been reimagined endlessly in art, literature, and popular culture, often stripped of its theological nuance and turned into a weapon, a relic, or a prize. These retellings reveal more about modern anxieties than ancient ones. We want the Ark to be found because discovery promises closure, certainty, and control. Mystery, especially sacred mystery, is uncomfortable. There is also a political dimension. Claims about the Ark are often tied to legitimacy, heritage, and divine favor. To possess the Ark would be to possess a direct link to sacred authority. That alone explains why theories about its survival are so fiercely defended. The Ark still confers power, even as an idea. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that the Ark's disappearance was intentional and final. Not hidden, not waiting to be rediscovered, but removed because its role was complete. A reminder that objects, no matter how sacred, are temporary, while belief evolves. In the end, the Ark of the Covenant remains powerful because it resists resolution. Found or lost, real or symbolic, it continues to ask the same question it always has. What happens to faith when the object at its center is gone? The fact that this question still matters may be the Ark's greatest legacy. That brings us to the end of this episode of Compact Mysteries, part of the Compact Histories Network. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss any future episodes, and consider leaving a rating or review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. You can find more episodes at compactmysteries.com, where you can also explore our other podcasts covering biographies, history, disasters, warfare, and true crime. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Finally, please consider supporting the show directly by buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/mysteriescoffee to see how. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.